Welcome to another Biota recording. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today I have the pleasure of talking once again with Anton. Anton, I received quite a bit of feedback from listeners associated with our last conversation. They were excited to hear Biota-related discussion again. I will be talking with Tim Taylor this Sunday. So he said that he doesn't have much to say about simulation as a service, and really he's not totally sure what we'll be talking about, but I'm sure, at least from the conversation this evening, we'll be able to instigate some conversations with Tim Taylor as well. So thank you for the chance to chat again today.
Yeah, it sounds great. I'm glad people enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it as well.
So I was re-listening to the recording today because I kind of walked away from it even after post-producing it and putting in a bit of editing, thinking, I really don't want to sound like too much of a downer, but I did want to start tonight with regards to a circumstance that has presented itself on Wikipedia. And I've contacted Tim and a few other folk in the community just to let them know that from my experience, I've actually had my pages deleted now on Wikipedia, but a number of other pages in the community are marked for deletion. Some projects have already been deleted. The circumstances currently with Wikipedia is that I think probably when I last recorded about this about a decade ago, the quality of articles that were being written, and to be clear here, listeners to this very podcast put together the Wikipedia articles associated with my project Noble Ape, and also, I think, me personally. And podcast listeners kind of continued to maintain pages. I know they put in efforts with regards to the Artificial Life Organizations page, and a bunch of other projects, Crediting, I think maybe Polyworld, I know Bioids. There were a variety of pages on Wikipedia that were put together by listeners at the time in a kind of 2006, 2008 timeframe, and they have been in place up until recently. Obviously, as I noted last recording, I've got additional issues going on, but there seems to be a need currently for these pages to be changed to a more universal format through Wikipedia, in particular with regards to external references and a lot of external references. And I've tried through my own deletion process to get what the standard is now through Wikipedia, because I have probably at least half a dozen historical articles, a bunch of academic publishing, a number of different sources. I can't actually remember because I didn't, the pages on Wikipedia weren't really my interest specifically, but I remember putting up one of the Apple related articles and some other things online to assist a Wikipedia editor at the time. So whatever's happening currently, if the field of artificial life is expunged from Wikipedia, it will mean that people such as Anton will not be able to discover the field. And certainly the appeal that I made to Wikipedia was that this is a community impact thing, that although they feel very much that they're adhering to various standards that they want to adhere to on Wikipedia going forwards, there aren't a lot of sources to get information, easily accessible information on artificial life. And while I agree the stuff that was on Wikipedia wasn't particularly ideal, it still represented a means of people coming to my site and my work through one of the few means that was left, particularly after, Google was paid for to eliminate searches for my work and YouTube was paid for to eliminate searches for my work. So Wikipedia was one of the last means that people would access my stuff, and to have it pulled in the past week has been really very curious, because I've been defending myself, but I'm not really even defending myself. I'm defending the people that wrote the articles 10 years ago. And it's a very curious circumstance that I've been exposed to currently. Did they state why they're
putting it down, or?
They reference, if you've ever encountered Wikipedia folk, they had these pages that they reference, 3 4-letter acronym pages. But actually what came through, which I've gotten some acknowledgement of now in my deletion, was they didn't read any of the references. They took a slight to the tone of the article, and you've got to appreciate this was written by people more than a decade ago about what they found was important. So, for example, the fact that I spent 18 months with Wozniak, which I don't particularly talk about, it's not a highlight of my life. It's certainly, it's something that occurred, but, I spent 8 years working at a major tech company doing a bunch of other interesting stuff with simulation, if people would care to, take interest in that aspect of my life. So, I guess what I found striking was that I was firstly, they asserted that it was a puff piece and that I had written it, even though that wasn't the case. And if I had written it, I wouldn't have maintained it in the way that it was maintained. My view historically has been that if you edit your own stuff on Wikipedia, your stuff will get deleted. So it's just a stupid thing to do. And certainly in discussions with others, I've advised them of that. I'm not even sure what the case is now associated with that whole thing. But because I'm being asked to justify personally stuff that others had written about me on Wikipedia more than a decade ago, the whole thing is very curious. Now, they didn't read any of the links, so I've lodged an appeal, which was a very interesting process because it was just a bunch of people that had said delete, delete, delete. There's no additional information aside from the reference to me spending time with Wozniak. Just delete, delete, delete. So when I went back, I said, I'd like some more information here. If we're trying to improve Wikipedia, if that's the end goal, which I'm completely in agreement about, rather than just say delete, 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 move on, which is exactly what they said when I got in contact with them at the appeal. Let's have more information so I can help others get their pages right on Wikipedia. I mean, it's simple. So thankfully, after a couple of cycles of me saying the same thing over again and then saying delete, 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 which seems to be a really curious way to communicate, but anyway, they are now acknowledging that they would like to see the sources, which they no longer have access to because they deleted the page, which is curious. So I provided my local version of the sources, which I've maintained for many years because obviously things are removed on the internet. They're now reviewing those. So my hope is that I can appeal what has occurred and I can try to right these circumstances, but it has been an uphill and taxing thing, which has taken a good portion of my time, which I could be spending working on Noble Ape. And I think going forward, we as a community need to be incredibly aware that we will be viewed in a very hostile and negative light by people who are in their, I'm assuming you're not in your early 20s, Anton, but people who are in their early 20s. And unless we provide things that they want to see, they will not permit our stuff to continue to be out there in the forms that they've been out there.
If Wikipedia wants to take the stance that sort of like smaller, scrappy articles need to be brought up to snuff, well, that's fine. I mean, that's if Wikipedia wants to go that route, that's fine. That's not what it's traditionally been. It's sort of done it by allowing whatever on and have it, go through the processes, good or bad. But I think, as we've talked before, A-Life, because it's such a fragmented field and because all the projects are frankly quite weird oftentimes and oftentimes completely impenetrable. Like I can look at someone's work and not understand it whatsoever, even though I'm reasonably sort of steeped in the field. So unless you're like it's almost like high-end mathematics or something where people just can't even communicate it unless they're like locked in a room together for hours. So it's not going to survive that kind of secondary or even tertiary reference process. So if that's the case, I think the Wikipedia format is still quite good. So, I mean, just running a private wiki somewhere might be the best thing. And related to the fact that it's hard to find this stuff online, I think there's just a fundamental wording problem right now because artificial intelligence has become so hot at the moment. Pretty much if you type in artificial life, you're more likely to find a random news article about artificial intelligence that's talking about life than you are to get hit with the actual field. And that's just, I think that's inescapable. You're not going to get Google to sort of get smarter or change their policies or whatever. So obviously you can't rebrand it, but if there was a major website for artificial life that could be considered the hub, then there's just a much higher chance that would surface. And then once you're in there, you're kind of in your own little world. And then from there, you presumably could find other things. Cause there's no way, if I type in artificial life bees, I'm not going to find anything. It's going to be 10 pages before something of interest can occur. And then oftentimes the pages look weird and dodgy and you don't know what's going on anyway. So yeah, if there was a hub, it would help a lot. A community maintained hub that had, not lower standards, but at least standards that could be in line with a couple of hobbyists typing this stuff up, right? Because the larger articles that you see on Wikipedia now, for better or for worse, they're written by dozens, if not hundreds of people. So, maybe they're inaccurate or whatever, but the production quality, the sheer man hours that are being put into them is huge. I mean, you can't expect that out of a small community. So, I think it's a bit of a losing battle if it is going to be this kind of more fragmented field, which I think it's hard for it not to be due to the kind of reasons we discussed, people's personalities and so on.
So one of the people that reviewed, or didn't even review, just provided references to Noble Ape for the deletion on Wikipedia, wrote an extended treatise on... My mother's an author, not really professionally because she was a diplomat, but she wrote books and had them published and run awards for writing books. And she was part of a writers group in Australia. And one of the people that reviewed Noble Ape wrote the article on one of my mother's writing friends. And it is extraordinary, the level of detail that she wrote into this article. In fact, I contacted her after the deletion process and said to her, I actually know Sarah Dowse, the woman who she wrote on, which she'd probably know because my mother's name is the same as my name. She's not called Thomas, but she's called Barbalet. And through this, it does take it takes Wikipedians, whatever these things are, to write articles. What we need to do, which we historically had a decade ago, is half a dozen, maybe just 3 or 4, dedicated souls who research the standards on Wikipedia and then write artificial life articles on Wikipedia as a means of communicating exactly the problem that you discovered, which is that it's really difficult to find the state of the art. It's really difficult to find projects about certain things that should be relatively easy to find. Obviously, Google is not helping the process. So, yes, it would be wonderful to have a private wiki, but it would also be wonderful to have people like we had a decade ago who were actively writing to the Wikipedia standards at the time, of only now, that could go into the depth that this person did with regards to my mother's writer friend. And that, I think, would solve the problem fundamentally with regards to Wikipedia. I shouldn't be representing my work with Wikipedia. That's perfectly clear, and I feel kind of dirty doing that. But in the short term, that's the only way this thing is going to move forward sufficient that I can provide information at least out to the community associated with what happened with me. But we really need others to do this thing. So what I would implore is, even if you're listening to this podcast and you weren't part of the original Wikipedians that wrote the articles on artificial life more than a decade ago, consider if this is not your way to actually assist this relatively fragile and bespoke community. And that would be my appeal.
That would definitely work as well. I mean, that if people step up, that would be fantastic.
It would give me a chance to actually work on Noble Ape, which I have done. I've done a substantial amount of work on Noble Ape this weekend. In fact, that's the sole reason that I wrote an appeal. I was just going to walk away based on the quality of delete commentary. So originally, up until Sunday evening, I was just going to walk away from this thing. And then I thought, look, I'm perfectly capable of writing an appeal. So anyway, hopefully I will have better news for Tim Taylor when I talk to him on Sunday. I wanted to talk about what I was working on this weekend, which was partially this concept of artificial life in the cloud or artificial life as simulation services. And I'm going to digress a little bit here and explain why I'm doing this currently. Noble Ape, from when I started writing it 23 years ago, was written in the C language. C is a language, ladies and gentlemen. It may not be taught in universities anymore, but it was a language. It still is, really. Writing the simulation in C has cost me probably tens, if not hundreds, of contributors in the past decade. It's not a language that's used anymore. It's even more bespoke and elaborate than Wikipedia scroll. And it's something that I realize now I probably should have discarded about a decade ago. I've split Noble Ape in half. I've taken the graphics component of Noble Ape, and I now call that the client. And I've taken all the simulation under that, which simulates weather, biological interactions, a wide variety of psychological interactions, language, communication, internal narrative associated with other apes the ape meets and doesn't meet. I mean, a wide variety of aspects of this thing, which was not just created by me. It was created by me, a gentleman called Bob Mottram, a fellow called Myrtle Pentapalli, a gentleman called Pedro Ferreira, a bunch of engineers at Apple and Intel. There are lots of different components of the code, although in the past 3-4 years, it's been primarily me that has rewritten almost all of it. Taking this, dividing it in half. The upper half, I am writing in Swift. The client, I'm writing in Swift, because there's a new generation of developers that I have a lot of exposure to at work where Swift is their religion. That's all they write in. I could have written in Java. I have historically written in Java for those that are interested in Android, and that option is always there as well. The other side, the simulation side, is currently written with a server surface layer, just an HTTPS server, and then the entire simulation behind it driving a JSON output, which updates based on the client interaction, but also you can just do through changing URL params, basically. The aim is to rewrite all of that in Node.js, which currently is the language of the, again, similar to the Swift end, is the language of the new folk that I'm encountering continuously at work, that this is what they program in. It could have been written in a variety of other things, Java, JavaScript, well, Node.js. So maybe PHP, who knows, a variety of things, but I'm picking Node.js. That is the new division. So I've set myself a date, which is always important, 23 years, June 13th this year. My hope is to launch a majority of that. Barbalet.io is the site that's covering all of this, and we'll cover it after the launch. So that is the project I've been working on, to get simulation as a service, which has been the mantra for many years of this gentleman, Pedro Ferreira, who worked on Barbalet 10 years ago, told me, you need to start doing this thing as a service. You need to break up all the underlying components. Oh, the other thing is, once you've broken up the simulation part, the bit that makes the timing, the bit that does the landscape, the bit that does the biology, the bit that does all the other interactions in the simulation can become individual services, microservices, which you then write accordingly. So that is what I'm working on currently with Barbalet. And it is very much in line with stuff that Tim Taylor was talking about, again, 5 years ago. And I think it's a fascinating way of moving these concepts in simulation to a new audience, a new developer audience. What say you, Anton?
Well, I mean, I think it'll be hard for me to side. I mean, so how do I put this? So maybe you hit on the wrong person, but I love C. I absolutely hate JavaScript.
Well,
but I'm 100% in agreement with your thrust of like, let's get new people on board and let's modernize this thing. And I think there's a lot of huge advantage to getting it on the web. I think I'm just like selfishly just so deeply hateful of web programming.
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm currently, what's interesting is on the Swift side, let's talk about the Swift side, slightly less political in this discussion. I've already found issues in Swift, which means that there are sub-projects under Barbalet, including a mass battle simulator, a simulator of an urban environment, a planetary simulation. These are all sub-projects of Barbalet. They share the same core, but they have different skinning and different interfaces that come from it. The urban simulation does not run properly in Swift. The port that I did for every other thing works fine in Swift. The urban simulation, there seems to be some weighting in the way in which I'm drawing the urban environments, where the drawing is just out of sync, even though code's exactly the same. So I'm maintaining legacy components to this. I'm certainly, if nothing more for one-to-one comparison, maintaining the C simulation source code for at least a couple of years, maybe even 4 or 5 years. And if people come in that want the C source code, then I'll maintain parity with that going forward. One of the easiest ways to unit test these kind of things is to have a competing thing that does exactly the same thing, but just with different source. So I will probably maintain the C source code for some time as the kind of comparative gold standard, at least on the server side.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't totally state myself correctly. I think it's not that I love C because I love the language itself. I think it's actually got lots of awful quirks and things, and I'd love it to see modernized, but I like the way that it respects how you can program the machine and not sort of does things behind your back all the time, which is the trend in modern languages. So I'd love like a modern C that just had stupid stuff like strings that know their length, like just basics, but I don't want like all that much more than that. So there's a language called Jai that Jonathan Blow's working on that's a bit like that, which is like kind of basically C, but with all the modernizations of like Rust or things of that nature, but not in the direction of C++, which is totally kind of gone totally loopy at this point. And like,
so that's what
seems to be eating itself.
Barbalet has the Noble toolkit, which does all of that. Strings have lengths. It does object processing. So I already have that in the core of Barbalet to make C usable in the context that you describe it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of nice things you can add to C that would just be useful utilities like, introspection without a runtime cost. like automatic ways of stringifying enums, and there's just like random stuff that's just standard now. That like a way to like look back at do inspection from within code if you wish it. And so I don't know. I think the main thrust of C, I think, is still correct. You know, no garbage collection and kind of staying close to the hardware and all of that stuff. I think that's fine. It's just it could have just been cleaned up a bit, and I think C++ dropped the ball. Like Rust is trying, and D tried as well. But anyways, I think it's undeniable, like you said, that the language of the new generation is like JavaScript and Swift, I think, for that matter. But how is like so the backend is now in Node.js? Is that performant enough to run these heavyweight simulations?
Well, that's to be decided. I'm not saying it currently is. The C component to that is still, I think I'll get to June 13th with the C stuff still being on the server side.
Yeah,
the way in which you have to tackle this is actually to create microservices after the fact and divide up the underlying simulation to be quite distributed.
Right.
And I think that's the only way. And you have to make decisions associated with the data that you're presenting.
Yeah.
You've got to make that very thin and also really just find means of replicating almost like hashes of data where you know it's being computed on both sides, but it's actually far too heavy to pass the data in a large form, which Noble Ape already does, thankfully. I mean, the land is generated through basically a 4-byte fractal description. So, you know, these things are already pretty well taken care of with Noble Ape. What interests me is the secondary part, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about this because this is simulation as a service. Once you have the Noble Ape simulation that's up there, perhaps even with an urban environment to make it easy, I was pitched in, I think, 99, the map of Berlin, which was vectored at the time, and a team that had made the map of Berlin offered it to me to see what the Noble Apes would do in Berlin, which was the earliest time. Now, I think a majority of the cities worldwide, through a variety of different sources, including open sources, are now available, at least with regards to building and street confines vector mapped. So I think the thing that fascinates me is actually taking the simulation to the real world and providing, you know, a series of points which obviously identify humans walking on the street, for example, in New York City, and then seeing how well the simulation reproduces movement in real time. You know, looking at real world things and moving it back into the simulation environment for kind of compare and contrast to see if the simulation is comparable to, you know, learning or predicting general movement and these kind of things. So I foresee simulation as a service actually moving in a really interesting direction that has practical real world implications and certainly solves a variety of problems which aren't solved very well currently by, you know, existing computer methodologies. So that's where I'd like to see it go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of having services that can plug in each other is great, even just architecturally speaking, that having people contribute, you know, like you said, it's more likely that enthusiasts nowadays would be more well-versed in Python or, you know, coming from the AI field, it's going to be mostly Python. And then coming from the web world, it's going to be mostly JS. So, you know, it's actually hard to deny that for like a small simulation that JS isn't a good idea. Because you can get, like, we were talking last time about getting your work out there, and JS is the number one way of getting your work out there. Like, forget putting source code up or even like articles. You could just put your stuff online, run it in the browser. Like, that seems to be the best way to get participation and get your ideas out there by far. So I think, like, I wouldn't blame people sort of like for going that route. That seems really logical. So I've just had like really bittersweet relationship with it where I start off and I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to use all these dynamic properties. I'm going to get, you know, it's all going to be really flowy and nice. And then I try to simulate like 100 things and it's fine. And then I try to do like 10,000 and it just crawls. And then there's no way I can make it fast. Like, you know, already you have done like all the tricks of, you know, not using this feature or that feature and trying to like pray to the garbage collector as much as possible and sacrifice things to it. And then like, it's still slow. And I think it just, you hit this fundamental wall, but I think I hit it because I try to simulate lots of stuff. Lots of bitty things.
Two things here. 23 years worth of experience. I mean, there are others in the field that have 3 decades worth of experience. So my perspective is that most simulation problems just relate to how you divide the simulation problem. And moving that aside, the second part, the thing that concerns me through doing this is I am in two minds with regards to whether C was the obstacle for people picking up Noble Ape or whether complexity was the obstacle in people picking up Noble Ape. And when you start creating these things, the complexity and the way in which a new generation of developers are concerned by complexity is a concern that I have. This is why I'm doing this as an experiment, because it could happen that I put all of this stuff out there and the documentation is critical, YouTube videos, the works. But then it still requires developers that have an understanding or a complement to complexity when they come into this thing and realize that they can tinker with various areas. And the fear is breaking things, right? The fear is you'll break things and, things just won't work anymore and you'll tinker with for 5 minutes and it'll just break. And I think moving people past that concept of fragility is something that I've had a real problem with over the past at least decade. And I've had some success through this. I've had Bob Mottram, I've had the folks at Apple and Intel, and a variety of other actually professional programmers. I mean, people who have at least 5 years worth of professional programming seem to come to Noble Ape quite comfortably. I had an engineer from Motorola. I've had various engineers that have come to me and been able to work on certain aspects of Noble Ape without any concern. But there's a kind of introductory programmer that would come to this thing and may have concerns with regards to complexity. And what I'm trying to do is to offer very simple simulations to start off with, but also offer a means of saying, you can't break everything by tinkering with this one part, right? It might break the first time, but then source control is just a wonderful way of starting afresh. Every time it breaks horribly. So part of it is expressing this culture as well, but I'm feeling positive, let me just say.
Yeah, and I don't want to dampen the wind in your sails, to be honest, because I wish I could do that, because I've actually messed around a bit with trying to put JS up, and I think I might be digging my own hole when I work with it, because I seem to be drawn to precisely the parts that it can't do very well, and I seem to shy away from the things that it does well. So I think I might be doing a bit of self-sabotage with regards to web programming as well. So I think it should work out really well if you sort of I actually listened to your podcast when you described it. I think it was a few podcasts ago, and it sounded extremely sensible, especially farming out the more expensive bits to service IC and stuff. And then, I think in reality, if like you said, you have the data that is large, stay where it's needed and only transfer things, carefully. And so if it's architected carefully, I doubt there'll be much of a penalty and you'll get huge gains out of it. So I think, and like you said, you've got 23 years of experience, so you're going to architect it pretty dang well, I'm suspecting. So
let's hope. I mean, I've broken things so many different ways. You have to learn something through it. A topic that I wanted to cover is associated with collaboration. We've kind of touched on that. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, I don't know whether our conversation, you emailed me afterwards and said that our conversation certainly motivated you to consider putting your work online in some form, which was really the sole aim of the conversation last time.
Yeah.
A secondary question that I wanted to have for you is, as you discover these projects, do you find projects, and I've done this historically just to test out. Larry Eger's Polyworld was a great example of this. I took it, broke it apart, looked at whether I could replace the cognitive simulations of both projects, literally lobotomize the Noble Ape, lobotomize the Sea Monkey, stick the reverse brains together and see what happened. And it was actually a really fun project. For me, because I have no issue with regards to hacking a lot of code and working out how compilers break in a variety of different ways and these kind of things, it was actually fun on that level. But do you foresee yourself maybe finding a project online and just thinking, I could tinker with that a bit?
I've never been good at that personally. I don't know what trait that is, but I've never been the kind of engineer that breaks things to learn how they work. I learn how things work by making them from scratch. And so I'm much more on the synthesis school of thought than the analysis. I like reading books and then just trying to do it myself. And I think it's maybe it's some kind of selfish drive, but I basically find enjoyment in the building, not in the taking apart and modifying. So I think that's just a motivational thing, honestly. And I'm not sure I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but that's kind of what drives me, is to to feel like I made it myself, and I like figuring out that challenge. I absolutely loathe compiler issues, which is one of the reasons I stay away from open source.
A professional career on, but not because I like it, but because no one else will do it. Right?
Yeah.
My career is basically made up of things which I have to think about. Do I really want to put this on my resume? Do I really want to do this again? These things have included rewriting substantial systems, particularly firmware systems. And in terms of compiler issues, a company that I worked with and never for a majority of my career frequently requires you to rewrite everything in a new compiler form. So eliminate, libc++ to, libc or whatever, or do some major rework based on 25 patterns that are very common in the previous code but can't be used in the new compiler for whatever reason. That's basically my bread and butter for a majority of my career. The notion of creating stuff from the ground up is what I do after hours. The nature of making things work with the least amount of time and resources and looking at every possible way a compiler can break and how to rewrite code basically around how that compiler has broken. That's just, thankfully, in the past 2 years, my career has changed away from that, but pretty well solidly for the 30-odd years prior. Even when I was starting to program as an early teenager, my first paid-for programming gigs were take this fourth program and rewrite it in C, or take this fourth program and rewrite it in a very particular form of Ball and Pascal, or this kind of stuff. My career is built on doing work that no one else would normally want to do.
I think we should be going back to writing more things in fourth rather than less things in fourth.
Well, you could have. I have a few fourth fans but it's my Model Rail podcast. They're the ones who seem to like fourth. So anyway, moving on from fourth.
Separate podcast, but I think I've done a fair bit of that in at work as well. It's just, I think, like you said, when I come home after hours, that's the last thing I want to spend my time on. Is I try to do that once and just say, okay, these are my limitations. This is going to be my compiler. I'm not bringing any libraries because I don't want to deal with it. If I'm doing something, I'll just write it from scratch, because at least then it'll compile, and I'm not going to have to download some crazy make tool of the month.
A case example of this, the platform that I do my most support for decided last year they weren't going to support OpenGL anymore.
Yeah, well, that's actually, so I've never supported Mac, but that's kind of,
And truth be told, actually, the reason that Apple displayed Noble Ape, the reason that Nathan Slingerland and Sanjay Patel picked up Noble Ape in 2003 was because it compiled on 3 different Apple compilers at the time. And they didn't actually know of any other software that could do that. But it was just the nature of my life that I never knew what compiler I would have access to because I was a roving student. And I rewrote it based on the fact, today I'm using MPW, today I'm using, ThinkC, today I'm using, and I had to get it to work on all those compilers. So
yes, I actually really, I struggle with the fact that, I wish I was more into taking apart other people's code, because I think I would learn quite a lot. So I think that's a deficiency for me as a programmer, because I'm so much more drawn to writing it from scratch. But that being said, I think I learn a lot from doing it myself as well. So I don't know what the right balance is. But if it was something like Noble Ape, I think if I could somehow literally hack it in the browser, I'd be inclined to do it, because then I know I'm not downloading some kind of build system.
So I created ApeScript. I created ApeScript roughly a decade ago for exactly this kind of developer. It's not Erlang robust, but it's certainly robust enough that it won't crash on you, and it will give you plenty of warnings around, a variety of different programming pitfalls. When I created ApeScript, one of my developers at the time, Pedro Ferreira, took it away to write a new cognitive simulation in it. He never got it back to me. He went and joined CERN. They took his time from then on. But the hope has always been that people will take something like ApeScript and utilize it to create this when they don't, as you say, they want a browser-like hacking experience. So I have tried to offer that, but then, ApeScript was one of the 4 pages that Wikipedia pulled. So, this doesn't exist.
There's a thing online called Shader Toy. I don't know if you've come across it. And it's basically OpenGL hacking in the browser. And that's been a model that I'm quite happy with, and quite a lot of people in the games community enjoy it. And that's, highly restricted. It's like you just write shaders, but turns out you can do quite a lot in pixel shaders these days, including full ray tracing and dynamic scenes and all this stuff. So I think that model where you just like have the script on one side of the screen and then you have the simulation running on the other side, and you're just like literally invited to hack it right there, and then it's like live reloading. You don't have to restart and stuff like that.
Mm. I mean, ApeScript has real-time debugging that it provides as well. Yeah, so, I mean, the choice at the time was Lua or do my own, and I picked ApeScript over Lua. So maybe it was the wrong choice.
Lua has its own issues, but I like that. I wrote a bunch of stuff in Lua, and it's actually the reason I'm not such a fan of JavaScript, because they're basically the same problems. Like, it's really easy to get going, but then after you got like 10 files, you don't know where anything is anymore, and it's running really slow. And by the time, like, I actually went through an experience where I tried to I wrote a game in Lua, and then I tried to optimize it. And by the time I ended up optimizing it, I had to like rewrite the garbage collection thing. And I was basically doing C in Lua, like by the end of it, to make it run fast, and it still ran like 5 times slower than C, and I like reaped no benefit from Lua at the end of it. So I don't know if but the advantage is you can get started. So that's kind of if you go and get people hooked, it's awesome to be able to just, maybe you could have ApeScript run and, have a little editor. You can get like a bunch of open source editors now, just like plonk it next to the visualizer. And is there a way to maybe send ApeScript from the client down to the server and like get it dynamically uploaded in some apes?
So you can do that currently with the existing simulation.
Yeah, but as a service, like
you could do it. I mean, ApeScript as a service is certainly, as far as I can see, like one of the no-brainers to have, as you say, a browser with the editor in there, and then that sending stuff to the visual client for you to see.
Yeah.
You can already kind of do that with the simulation as the application, and it gives you the first cycle debug as the immediate first output. So you can do a kind of real-time thing where you have basically 2 files plus the simulation running, and you can get the debug being updated through one of the updated files. So, I mean, that's the way that I've done it historically, certainly to demo it. And I'm not sure how I think that's how Pedro Ferreira used it as well. You can also do it from the command line, which is even easier because you can have 2 files in the command line running and looking at what the debug output is from, the command line as well. So many possibilities.
That sounds super cool. I've never seen a simulation that is sort of running live while you can hack on it. I think that would be very enticing. I mean, to me at least, because I could see the changes of the stuff immediately. And if, like you said, it had reasonably robust handling to like at least not crashing it, then you can just...
So the whole thing about ApeScript is a single time cycle. What you're programming with ApeScript is a single time cycle, and you can make that as elaborate and fractal-like as you want.
Okay.
Particularly working way through, is the ape holding something? If the ape's holding something, then, execute this code. Or is the ape swimming? Then execute this code. I mean, it basically enables you to, from a single time cycle, do whatever you want to start experimenting with the simulation. You can cut bits, obviously, out of what the apes are doing, and then, it develops accordingly. So...
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic, because that's the same model that ShaderToy has, because there's no state, really. I mean, the state is maintained by the simulation, effectively, so you're not really storing any state in the script. You probably have some functions to sort of like write to memory, read from memory.
And what's fun is that you can make each individual ape run their own ApeScript. So you can have a majority of apes running one kind of ApeScript and another group of apes running another ApeScript, a radical individual ape running a third ApeScript. And
So here's the thing, because so on ShaderToy, they've basically built a community out of this where people post their shaders and you can look at them, and it's basically a bunch of cool art demos. But I could imagine a community of people where, so ShaderToy made it really easy that you click new and it gets you like a new shader, and then you put whatever you want, and then you just click save and it publishes it, and then it just goes up on the website, and it's, the latest one. So if on your nobleape.io, you had like a way to share these scripts, I could imagine a vibrant community of people saying, hey, look, I discovered this cool behavior. Here's my script, and maybe somebody else can take that one and mix it in. That gives you a really nice module to be like, to share that module, I think that's very accessible to people.
Anton, you've created another dot point for me to work on. I don't know whether I'll have it ready by June 13th, but certainly if I'm not dealing with Wikipedia, the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to chat. Apologies to you and the listeners, although the listeners hopefully won't get the brunt of the Wikipedia discussion. Apologies for that. I'm aiming to come to Berkeley this weekend, Saturday specifically. My wife has a bunch of other plans, but I haven't been to Berkeley for a couple of years now. She's going to take the car and go on a wild adventure, and I'm going to have a BART adventure and, head up to your part of the world. I don't know if you have any plans on Saturday. I've certainly got half a dozen things I'd like to do in Berkeley, but if I can meet you for a cup of coffee somewhere through then, we'll see if that works out. Yeah,
that sounds cool. I'm sure we could find some time. I'll have to see. I think we might have had some family plans, but I'll double check, and that if there definitely should be a coffee time for sure. That would be amazing.
Yeah, well, if it's not possible, I have enough stuff to do in Berkeley this one trip. Also, there's a slightly negative omen associated with me meeting people in podcasts. I did a podcast with one of the guys from Jackass, the MTV Jackass show, maybe 2 years ago now. And after recording with him for 9 months, it's pretty solidly for 9 months, he said, "Why don't you come and visit me in Pennsylvania?" I said, "Okay." Put the wife in a car. We drove to Pennsylvania. It was like a 7-day road trip. Spent about an hour and a half with him. Podcast was over. I've had a series of cases where I've met people, and it's basically ended the podcasting interaction. I don't know. It could be a wide variety of things. I might eat like George Costanza, who knows. But I do need to warn you that the longest and best run podcasts, Larry Yeager's a good example of this, but the longest and best run podcasts that I've had have never involved with me meeting the individuals in the podcast. So be warned, listeners, that this might be the last possible interaction that I have with Anton. But yeah, no, it'd be wonderful to meet you. I may be overly burdened with books and other things, which is just the nature of my visits to Berkeley, but it'd be nice to pick up a coffee perhaps sometime.
Yeah, cool. Maybe we can break the curse.
Let us hope. Let's live in hope.
Okay.
Anton, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we'll record again soon. Like I say, I'm going to be recording with Tim Taylor. We're going to hopefully cover some of the simulation as a service discussion, plus a bunch of other things. He's written a book about the origins of automata back to the 16th century. So I think we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about with Tim Taylor. Anton, no doubt you'll be listening into that one, and maybe we'll have discussions following that. Anyway,
cool.
Look forward to meeting you this weekend and talking to you soon. Take care.
Take care.